ER model has been used for past many years in order to represent this design this database. Maybe if you are comfortable with, or if you have gone through this UML models at least once, you can easily relate this. In UML diagrams we have something called as class, right? So exactly like that we have in ER diagrams. It is like this in software design. No, the way UML diagrams are going to play the role, in database design ER diagrams are going to play the role of it. And various things in ER diagrams are, one is called as entity. So ER itself means entity relationship model, right? ER model means entity relationship model, right? And in this entity relationship model there are actually three things that you should know. One is called as entity, okay, and the other is called as attributes, and the other is called as relationships, okay. So why do we generally use this ER diagram? Just to write in terms of pictures what is the information we collected. Just like this software design, first we are going to collect the requirements, which means we go and talk to the people, like what do they want, and now they are going to say in words they are going to describe what they need. Then we are going to convert that word description of their needs into these diagrams, right? And now whenever they speak of something, whenever they say their needs, there are going to be nouns, and the nouns are nothing but the things or the object. For example, they say person or car or board, whatever. So every object is nothing but a entity. So now when they talk about it, when they speak about it, when you collect the requirements, the nouns are going to be the entities, right? And then verbs are going to be relationship. Let us say a person owns a car, right? Owns, verb, that is going to be a relationship, right? Or a employee works for a department, works for, that is going to be a relationship, right? So now an entity is nothing but any object in your database is going to be an entity, right? And a relationship is nothing but any verb which you are going to describe is going to be a relationship. And what about attributes? Attributes are again nouns which describe these nouns. For example, a person, if he is an entity, then he is going to have attribute like this. He is going to have a name, he is going to have some age, and he is going to have an address, right? Phone number. So all these are going to be the attributes, right? So now entity is nothing but, you can think of it like a thing, right? A thing in our real world which is going to be recorded in our database, right? And that is what is called as entity. And what is an attribute is, attribute are nothing but the properties of the entities, or in order to better describe the entity we are going to use attributes, right? So you can think of it as properties which are used to better describe these things, right? For example, you can think of a entity as a person, right? And then how do we describe a person? Maybe using name, right, and age and address, phone number, all this, okay. And what is relationship is, you can think of relationship as association among entities. How are these things related? That is called as relationship. How is a car related to a person? A person owns the car, right? Or how is the department related to a employee? The employee works for the department, right? And this is called as relationship. Relationship is nothing but what is the association among these entities, right? So it is going to talk about association, right? For example, what is the association between employee and a department? Works for. So works for is a relationship, got it? So we have all these three things which have to be discussed in detail in case of ER diagrams, okay. So coming to this ER diagrams, the terminology is like this. We are going to use set theory here. In the sense, we talk about entity type and entity, attribute, it is okay, and relationship type and relationship, okay. Now what is entity and entity type is, we are going to talk about these two things generally. Entity type, right, and entity. Okay, so what is entity type is the name or the heading or the schema. Schema is nothing but the heading. For example, if I say person, person is an entity type who is having attribute is name and let us say address. Okay, now this entire thing is called as entity type. Entity type will describe the heading, right? It is also sometimes called as schema. So schema is nothing but the description, the heading, right? And what about the entity? Entity is nothing but a person who is going to be represented in this entity type itself. For example, let us say name is 26 and name is some Raju, right? And let us say address is some address is given. Now this is called as entity. So entity is actually an instance and entity type is the heading, right? Now sometimes it is also called as intension and it is called as extension. So if you want to think of it as a set theory, right, this entire set, the name of this set is called as entity type and the elements in this set, they are called as entities, right? And we are not going to change entity types, but then we might add and delete some elements into the entity type, right? Therefore entities, they may get added or they might get deleted, and at any time the number of elements or all the elements in any entity type is called as state of the entity, state of, generally it is also called as, if I put all of them together, state of the database. Got it? So even though this is quite, it is used, but then generally people will call an entity type as an entity, an entity as an entity type. So they are going to use them as if there is no difference. Actually there is difference. Okay, entity type means just the name and entity means the instance, right? So in some questions you might have to observe the difference, and in general whenever we speak in during the explanation, and sometimes use entity and sometimes use entity type, there you don't get confused. From the context it will be clear. Got it? And the same things will apply even for relationship also, right? Relationship type and the relationship itself. So relationship means it is actually an instance, and relationship type means what is its heading, schema, right? So schema is nothing but the heading, the how do you represent it. Okay, and now in ER diagrams we don't use really entities, we use entity types, which means we don't really show you everything that is present in the database. We don't write a set diagram and then we don't put a point for every element present in it. We are going to represent it in a shortcut just using the entity types. Therefore if you look at any ER diagram, you are going to only see the schemas, the headings, right? Not how many elements are present in this and not any set diagrams. We are going to make it, keep it as simple as possible. The main intention of this diagram is to help the communication between the technical designer of the database and the naive user who doesn't know anything about database. He is just going to say in words, and you are supposed to capture those nouns, verbs, and you are supposed to put them in the diagram, and a refinement has to go on. And for the refinement to go on, you are supposed to show this diagram to again the users, and they are going to say, see, this part has to be improved, or this entity is going to have even more attributes, or they might even say some constraints that you are again supposed to capture and again refine it. Got it? So this is actually a cycle. This cycle goes on for some time. Okay. So then what happens is, once we are done with this diagram representation, then we are going to the next level. So if you remember it, we are talking about the conceptual design, right? So once we are done with the conceptual design, then we have to go with the representation, right? Then we have to go with the physical representation. So now we are here. Okay, conceptual design. Next we will go for the representational design. So now we are going to use ER diagrams. Later we are going to use relation tables, which means later we are going to take these ER diagrams and convert them to the relation tables, and later we are going to take the relation tables and we are obviously going to store them on the hard disk, right? Implementation. So now we are going to look at this. Let's see in depth about each one of these, right? Once you understand them well, then the conversion of these ER diagrams into relationship tables is going to be straightforward. Okay.